Hi, my name is Henry Chu. I'm the international editor for Variety magazine, and I wanted to welcome you to our panel. This morning, it's Meet the U.S. Female Channels, or as somebody else said to me, what women want. So hopefully we'll address that question in the next 45 minutes with our guests here. We will be discussing that today and just hearing perspectives from broadcasters as to what they think the female programming needs are today, how audience tastes and viewing habits might be changing, and what your commissioning priorities and needs are. First off, though, I want to thank the Department for International Trade for helping to make this session possible. We have some representatives from the department back there. I think they're raising their hands right now in case any of you wanted to buttonhole them afterwards for some discussions and exchange of business cards. And it's actually great that we are seeing more international commissioners here at the Edinburgh Festival this year, including the very people here sitting to my left, whom I'll introduce right now. We've got on the far end, Sarah Kozak, who is the Senior Vice President of Programming and Production at Investigation Discovery, or ID, and the American Heroes Channel. And right here next to me is Laura Fleury, who's Senior Vice President and Head of Programming for International at A&E Networks. So a warm welcome to both of you. Great to have you here. I'll just start off with a quick and easy question. Of course, we're all here to learn from you, but what is it that you want to get out of the Edinburgh Television Festival? What would you like to see? What do you want to learn? We'll start with you, Sarah, at the end.
Well, you know, I love that this is so very different to, just talking earlier about how different this is to real screen. And this is a real producer, creative place to be. And I want all producers who haven't made shows for Investigation Discovery or other of our nets to think about us and to bring their best ideas. And I just want to encourage that, your creative thoughts, especially in my place at the moment, which is obviously crime and ID. I want you to come to us.
Great. This is my first time at this festival, and I too am glad it's so very different to real screen. And in my capacity at A&E Networks across international programming, I am partnered with all of our channel partners around the world. So we have many brands. We have A&E and History Channel and Lifetime and FYI and Crime and Investigation. And so although out of the US we don't do a lot of international co-productions, we do out of international, and we certainly do out of each of those regions. So there's a huge amount of opportunity. I think a lot of you already know our UK team well, and they oversee a joint venture that involves many, many countries. So it's just great to be, as Sarah said, it's great to be in to be reminded why we got into this business in the first place. You know, I started off in independent filmmaking in New York City, where there was no money but a lot of passion, and so it's really nice to just be reminded that we're all here because we love to tell stories that we hope people want to hear. So good luck to all of you.
Well, let's get down to business. I know that actually not all the producers here in the audience are necessarily familiar with your channels or your shows. So actually, maybe we can start with you, Sarah, and ID. I think we've got a...
Yeah, I mean, just to set this up, this little bit of tape, it's only just over a minute long, but I didn't want to show you our conventional brand spot, which you know, was a montage of our core programs. We're going to be talking later about some of our special events, which have done so well for us in the US and around the world. And I want to give you a flavour of those with this spot. We are talking, we've been, by the way, we celebrate our 10th birthday, which means we're really young next January. And we've grown and grown in such a powerful way to become, you know, the leading network for women in the US. In fact, just this year, 2017 alone, you know, we are #1 for women 25-54. And in total day for persons 25-54, and we're a top 5 network in crime, in prime and crime, and you know, so our success has built and built, and our audience has come with us along the way. They have been absolutely fantastic. Plus our producers, we've worked with so many of the same people, wonderful producers, both from the US and from the UK. You know, over this great 10 years, we are making, get your head around this, around about 650 original hours a year. That's a colossal amount. Only networks such as, I suspect HGTV are probably right up there. You know, they produce a great many hours, a lot of half-hour shows. We are almost exclusively hour slots, although we do lots of 2-hour slots. But, you know, the unifying factor across the whole slate is it's real, it is true, it is not made up, and we don't have anything that is in the scripted, dramatized realm. Although a large number of our shows, and I'm sure that many of you have watched ID here on Sky and on Virgin, if you haven't seen it in the States, but you'll know that the things that glue our shows together are real interviews, are real footage of people, and of course, you know, in great dramatic recreations, which I can say, hand on heart, 10 years ago were not as good as they are now. And right now I would put them up against any dramatic recreations made for any network in this country or in the US. And Laura, at A&E, you look over a vast array of channels. They're very diverse, so I think we've got a couple of clips that are very different shows, but just to give a flavor of what kinds of shows
I'll set that up too, just because, in my international role, as I mentioned earlier, I'm across all of our brands, and so you have Lifetime here, which is obviously a female-skewing network. We have A&E Network in the US, and a lot of that content, and you would see on Crime and Investigation here, which the type of crime that we do, although not the same as what ID does, still has a general female skew to it. And if you were at the entertainment panel, Elaine Fontaine-Bryant talked about some of that content, and we have a crime panel tomorrow, so we're going to obviously talk about crime today because it does have an appeal to women, and I think we're going to talk about, of course, what that means to target women. We also have a channel called FYI, which is sort of an HGTV type of network, but for a bit younger and a little bit more millennial thinking in terms of doing it your own way. So and then we have, of course, on Lifetime, in addition to the unscripted that we do, which you're going to see a clip of, we have a long, long tradition of doing made-for-TV movies, which I would say, have evolved in a similar way in terms of the quality and the premium value that they bring, as well as scripted series. So these two clips, one is from a program with Leah Remini, that is a pretty powerful show on A&E about her leaving Scientology and the people that she's trying to bring along, and a very different, tonally very different program, a new program that's on Lifetime that is a new dance show. The reason I showed both of those is to give a sense of the breadth of while female skewing, very, very tonally different, and obviously not going after the same people necessarily. I think one of the things I did want to share with the group in terms of if you have any impression of Lifetime, and Lifetime was up until recently just an American brand, so it probably doesn't have the same meaning, but it was a place, it was a channel that was the #1 network for many, many years in cable, and is still a top women's, I didn't realize we'd been unseated, so we were right up there, and in the US. And what I think the team on the US side has really tried to do, and that's really echoing through our Lifetime channels around the world, is to really identify, well, what kind of person are we really talking to, and what kinds of stories are we telling in this place that is Lifetime? And it's really about trying to tell stories that have heart, that have humor, and that have a bit of edge, but not so edged that they are mean-spirited. And I think that's pretty distinctive in the female space, that is something to really own, and that's represented certainly in the unscripted, but in the scripted as well. And I think that they've identified that there's their viewers, our viewers are not just women, but it does skew towards women, but they're moms. These are women who aren't necessarily super educated. Some of them are, it runs the gamut, but they are really interested in stories that inspire them as parents, and to build a better world for their kids. And they're the heroes, the heroines of these stories, and some of them are men. They don't have to be perfect, but they have to be really trying to do good. And if that's not clear, if their mission doesn't feel clear, then they're not necessarily embraced by this particular audience. So I think that has been a really important process that Lifetime has gone through to really identify, what the message is and who they're trying to speak to.
Well, let's try to build that out in terms of what it is that women do want. I mean, there is still a vast appetite for shows about, weddings, food, fashion, now true crime, and also, as you said, let's be honest, some of these categories cut across gender boundaries. Men enjoy some of them as well. But Sarah, what do you look at when we talk about female programming? What does that mean to you? What is it that you're trying to sort of identify with that?
It's an interesting question, because I've worked on other of our nets, including TLC in the US, and that's very similar in the sense of its broad appeal to women and the experiences that they go through, at various stages of their life. And obviously, TLC pretty much owns weddings, with shows like Say Yes to the Dress, which has actually translated very, very well over here in the UK. But it's so great for me to have segued on to a network which, again, is very focused for women. I always think about who our audience is, and I know that person. I feel like I know her intimately, that core viewer. And her desire for a kind of escapism, and it may seem so crazy that crime has become a place to escape to, but it's true. It's a comfort food. Yeah. And why should murder be comfort? And I can only think that that's always been the case for women. That in actual fact, mystery and murder mystery, has been part of all our lives ever since we picked up our first Agatha Christie or Patricia Cornwell or a great mystery book which we loved when we were younger, and were captivated right from that first page, that first paragraph. Our storytelling for women is exactly the same. Yeah. That you start with, you very often start with the body, or you start with something that is a huge question. Who did it? There's something bad out there. You set up your mystery right at the start of the program, and then, very often the first 2 or 3 acts continue that mystery just like a good book does, and then you start to hone in on who did it and what happened. I'm talking very much core programming here, until you get to the suspense of will he be caught? Nearly always a he, of course, but we have a lot of bad women too. So. And you get through to your end of your show, and you have the satisfaction of seeing the perp being taken off in the orange jumpsuit, and life is safe again. It appeals to all those things which we all love when we get under the duvet and watch a scary movie or a thriller. That puts you on the edge of your seat. Women love it.
And of course, actually, during what they called the golden age of the detective story back in the war era, World War II, there was the idea that people wanted something that spoke to their moral impulses about, evil being punished, etc. But,
yes.
You mentioned Agatha Christie. Of course, a lot of your programs are far away from that in terms of not being sanitized. They're not tidy little mysteries about the body in the library that you don't really see. Yeah. They can be quite gruesome. And in fact, I think we have a clip from one of your upcoming show that maybe aired last night.
That did actually.
Shattered, I think. Maybe
premiered in the US last night.
Take a quick look.
Airs here on 6th of September.
Yeah. This is actually a fairly grisly case of dismemberment. So if you can give us your 30-second pop psychology idea of, women being attracted to something that is actually so gruesome.
There is nothing here that you're never going to see this dismemberment. This poor woman's boyfriend was shot. She was then locked in a box and raped repeatedly over the next 24, 48 hours before she managed to escape. The perp was caught fairly quickly. It's the psychology of the case that is so fascinating. It's how she coped with the horror and the fear. And frankly, you know, I would say that grisly and gore are two words I hate. I want people to watch something and feel the visceral fear of the situation, but I do not want them to be going, I can't look at that. So we don't show it. We simply don't. Far more frightening in every single sense is what you don't see. And this series, which as I say, premiered last night, and I'm anxiously waiting to see how it did. And I hope it did really well. But no narrator, the three people most connected with the crime, the woman who was locked up, whose boyfriend was killed, the cop who dealt with the case, who became very close to her and to the other gentleman whose beloved son was killed. It's their story. They're connected. You know, their lives changed forever and connected forever by this murder. That's what it explores.
In terms of sort of visceral responses, Laura, obviously crime shows are part of the lineup across the A&E networks. I'm thinking also of ones that have some uplifting elements. Particularly, there are two projects you've got coming up on the Elizabeth Smart case, and for those of you who haven't heard of that, Elizabeth Smart was a 14-year-old who was kidnapped from her home in Salt Lake City in 2002 by a religious fanatic who then imprisoned her and raped her over several months before she was eventually rescued. I think you have an interview with her is one of the projects, and also a TV movie. If we can play a clip from that too, just to give.
Backing up from that for a second, and then I'll talk about the specific project. I think before I moved into international, I was at A&E Network out of the U.S. developing a lot of crime shows, among other shows. But and I think that this whole conversation about are women attracted to gore and all this sort of thing, which to me is not what these stories are about at all. They're exactly what you say, which is it appeals to men and women because these stories have been in the Bible and in Shakespeare, and these are all these sort of fundamental stories about sort of the edges of humanity, and then how do you reset yourself to believe that the world is actually good, and where's the hope and where's the empowerment that comes with the belief that something bad can happen and then it gets resolved. So I think that's where the comfort comes in, and then there's a whole spectrum of the kind of crime programming that's out there. There's the truly core stuff that in most cases has a tidy resolution so that you can feel intensively and then feel safe in the end. And then there's what's the evolution of the fact that I think because there's such a mistrust in
authority,
in the man, if you will, and institutions, that this idea of really being able to spend a lot of time digging into a case that may not have been handled properly is something that people are interested in, and that seems to cross over. It isn't just so much a gender thing. It's what kind of experience do you want? Do you want to lean forward? Do you want to lean back? Are you looking to relax and have a catharsis? So I think crime does a lot of those things depending on how it's handled. And this particular program, the first episode being with Elizabeth Smart, and these are 2-hour formats, really is an inspiration both of the biography series as it's coming back, which was tended to be a female-skewing appeal series, and a series we did for a number of years called I Survived. So there's a simplicity of hearing firsthand, and it's not that no one's ever done those types of interviews before, but I think having someone at the level of Elizabeth Smart, who's never told her story ever before with this kind of detail, at a point in her life, I'll say also, where she was ready to really talk about it, because she'd been interviewed before, but very much in a shutdown sort of way, I would say. We did a show with her, and she just wasn't ready to go there. And now she's an adult and a parent, and so it's a really extraordinary documentary. And I think there's a real fascination in human behavior, and that's not exclusive to women. But it does play into, I think, the fact that women are often the victims of crime, so that there's a part of you that's kind of always preparing, well, what would I do? But then again, to your question earlier, I don't know that there's really female programming so much as there are shows that appeal to different types of people and they want a different type of experience. And you might want to have an escapist experience that is in dance, or then maybe you're going to watch the dance show because you love to see parents with their kids encouraging them to do something that involves a flourishing, you know, encouraging their talent. Or you might want to watch women fight with each other. That might be appealing to you. And so I think, and obviously female skewing content doesn't necessarily need to have women at the helm of it. But that is something that I want to make sure that I mention in this room, is that one of the things that as a company we're really focused on, but specifically for Lifetime Network, is really promoting women behind the camera as directors, as scriptwriters, as producers, as showrunners. There's a cheekily named initiative we have called Broad Focus, which hopefully translates, and that is an initiative, particularly in our scripted work, both our movies and our series, to not only look out for that great talent that exists among women, but also cultivate it in young people, and provide training and that sort of thing. So that's, I think that's, in order for, if we're talking about the subset of female skewing programming that is about women's stories, it's important that those storytellers include women.
Well, and for you too at ID, Sarah, do you find that, are they the female producers who are coming up with the stories that you think are really resonating and are the ones that are working best on your channel?
You know, it's interesting. I am thinking of all of the production companies that we're working with right now, and those we've worked with over, say, just the last 5 years. I think it's very sad that very few of them have women at the helm of the companies, that the companies still skew. You know, the principals are still very often men, and I'd love to see more companies that are actually run by women and had more diversity at the helm. But when it comes to the showrunners and when it comes to the producers and the writers, my God, women across the way, absolutely, 100%. And I think, you know, sort of just bouncing off what you just said about women behind the camera, OWN has had obviously terrific success this last couple of years with Ava DuVernay's Queen Sugar, entirely crewed by women, proudly, brilliantly crewed by women. And I'm so proud of that. Now, across the whole spectrum of Discovery Networks, of course, we'll have so many projects that are owned outright by women. But I would love to see more.
Well, and here we are at a festival that's called an international one, and since you're an international, thinking of what works globally with female audiences, what have you found, Laura, that actually goes all the way across cultures and countries?
Ultimately, the things that travel are the things that tend to be the most popular, even domestically. So they're just the stories that transcend, that are universal, that are or that really strike a chord of just a great format. You know, something like Project Runway is one type of show, and then you've got another series that I was involved in developing that's still on the air today, called First 48, which is a homicide investigation program that sort of follows the initial first 48 hours of an investigation, and that travels really well. It's partly because it's crime, partly because it's whodunit, and partly because it's a very clear format. I think that when it comes to women and the role of women in different cultures, it's so different. And I'm new to international. It's only been a year, and what I'm learning about the evolving role of women in South Korea as we launch a Lifetime channel in South Korea October 1st, and a History channel as well, which is a little bit easier to navigate. History travels so beautifully internationally, even though people are most interested in their local history. It's just a topic, that area, that travels really well. With women, it's really all about the nuance of what is the right tone. And so that's been a big branding challenge for us. Right. Yeah, so it's very hard to answer that question.
But would you find something like the Elizabeth Smart clips that we just saw. For me as an American, that felt like a very American story. It was in Salt Lake City, which is a very Mormon place. The furor that erupted around it and all the clues and just sort of the national conversation was really dominated by this young woman in a way that perhaps it wasn't in other countries. Is that something that seems too regionally focused? And often with true crime, does it need to be what might have happened next door to you and not 3,000 or 6,000 miles away?
Crime has always, A&E Networks have been doing crime programming for 25, 30 years, and it's the best traveling content besides history, next to history. And I think it's because of the way we all approach it, which is yes, you're certainly tapping into the community, but these are ultimately stories that are very universal because we can all relate to wanting to make sure, well, what would I do if this happened to someone I love? How would I get my child back from the kidnapper? Those stories that ultimately make us feel like there are answers to the bad things that might happen in the world, that we feel out of control. It sort of makes us feel a sense of control. And these stories that are ultimately stories of survival, of these situations, and this is why I Survived was such a great series for us, and also was a great format that was iterated in different countries, because you can relate to, even if you don't know Salt Lake City at all, you don't have to. You can relate to the idea of what if your child was taken out of your window, or what if you were the child who was taken out of a window? How did you get up how are you sitting here talking to us today? And I think the approach is very personal, so it feels like you're hearing this story from a friend, and then that story of survival becomes part of your own experience, which again I think is really empowering, and I think we need those stories with all the crazy things that are happening in politics in all of our countries that are daunting. We need to see the stories of people who went through worse stuff and are here to tell us that things are going to be okay. So
the same. I mean, here we are. These 650 hours, all of them work everywhere, in 168 countries where ID is. We're in over 200 countries as a company. 168 countries, ID works. It might not necessarily be a dedicated network, it might appear on something else, another discovery network, but the stories are relatable and they work. And I'm reminded actually of, do you remember that line? I think it was in Family Guy a few years ago, and I can't remember who was saying it to who, but I think they might have been talking about Lifetime, when they said, there was a great line about, oh yeah, all men are bastards and they will kill you. And there's that feeling when you watch a show that is absolutely about relationships and emotion, and you can look at that person and think, oh my God, that could have been me. I know that person, and I know people who have had, intense, scary relationships. They didn't end, as so many of ours do, in murder, but they were close. So there is a relatability. What we don't do in the crime genre, and this is very important to remember, is we don't do things like, street crime and heists and or mafia stories, or too much organized crime, things that are entirely related to the business of drugs, which of course is the leading cause of crime and murder in the US. Is somehow related to drugs. That is very often so simple. Unfortunately so simple. Somebody owes somebody money and somebody ends up getting killed because of it. That's not us. We're about the twisty, turny, emotional stories, again, as I said earlier, with so much mystery and suspense and good drama in, and a conclusion that is satisfying and you feel safer at the end of it.
And I want to make sure, so we have some time for questions at the end, but given all these hours that you need to fill, and both of you, I want to find out just on a very practical level for the producers here in this room, how does your commissioning structure work? What happens there for you at ID?
It is constant and it is robust, and it's so easy for all of you. I mean, we ask, first of all, that producers, when they have an idea, first of all, they get it onto our portal, which is producers.discovery.com. And from that moment, you've got your log line in, you don't have to send the fancy treatment or the sizzle tape, you don't have to worry about uploading it. Then you get in touch with one of our development execs, and they will then guide you through the process from that moment on. They'll take the treatment, The development team have weekly meetings. They work in small groups, 3 at a time usually, with the producer and the show. They'll give you an answer very quickly about how good the idea is. Now, when they like something and they want to bring it up to the next level, where myself and other members of the team are going to be, that's our level B, then then they'll dive in deeper. They'll want to know more of the absolute stories. They'll have the structure of the show. You'll probably have maybe a bit of take, but we have greenlit shows just on great paper and great writing and a really interesting selection of stories. And you know that there is perhaps a finite number of crime stories. In a sense that if you dip into the well and you're looking for certain stories and then you match it up against, you look at what we've done already, you might find we have done it before. But you will find a different way of telling that story. You will find a different organizing principle to bring to the series. You'll find a way, like, best example, Aramedia, who I absolutely love, have done for us See No Evil, CCTT footage was the big organizing principle in each show, because our audience loves real footage. And then next they thought, okay, Hear No Evil. Let's go into audio in a big way so that audio drives the show. That was just a really clever way of thinking about how to look differently at crimes that we might have covered before.
And what's great is that sounds like there is some real collaboration there in terms of helping to develop a
Collaboration is key at every level. Once it comes onto my side with production, we collaborate. My EPs collaborate all the way. That is the only way that we'll ever work successfully is by doing it together as a team. And I can honestly say, we have, I think, the best relationships with our producers, with the production companies in the business. And they're happy relationships. They're very constructive, very, very healthy. And, it's been a great ride so far.
Well, and Laura, you have such a wide variety of channels in your stable. Mm-hmm. Is there any one overarching commissioning structure?
Well, I think,
what's the practical?
Yeah, I think, and I think we have the best relationship. But there's two different main ways that a project can sort of come our way. One is through all the domestic executives, which anything that gets commissioned domestically, we almost always get international rights for, because we have this strong international distribution piece, which means that we'll get to our channels around the world. And in that process, it is very much our programmers are developers too. So we take the pitch, we'll cultivate the pitch with you, we'll develop it with you, and then that same executive will be overseeing the production of the series. So it's a great ability to have that continuity, because not everybody's built that way. The other way in is through the international side, and that there's two pieces to that, which is either through the UK team, which is Heather Jones and Dan Korn and a bunch of other great folks who many of you know very, very well. And if they're interested in a project, and they can either just get it to us, and then we get it to, then the US will look at it too, and it might be a global commission, or it could be an international co-production that's spearheaded out of either the UK or any one of our other countries. So I just give the UK team as an example, but those exist in all across Latin America, Southeast Asia, North Asia, Eastern Europe, all over the place. So, so that's sort of a quick answer to the question, but very much I think we are absolutely a creative collaboration philosophy across all of our divisions and in all of our countries, and so most of our programmers have been producers at one time or another too. So,
do you have an internet portal or anything like that that's easily accessible online?
We have no, it's not quite that way.
Okay.
No, so you have to just. Actually, you get to go through that.
Pick up a phone and call.
So yeah.
If you've got questions out there, we have a few more minutes left for questions. So and just raise a hand, and there's a mic here. Back there.
Hi, Ian Russell, ITN. Got a question for both of you, really. It seems every year there's more and more very, very kind of like well-funded scripted aimed at female audiences. Has that affected the kind of stuff you program in the factual arena, and if so, how?
I'll jump in. Certainly, specifically for Lifetime networks, we have, for a long time, had a very strong original movie strategy that has evolved over the years. And for at least the last probably 10 years, many of those films are accompanied by documentaries that tell sort of the true story or the behind-the-scenes story of those when they're based on true stories, which is often. So actually, a lot of the stories that you guys have covered, we've covered too. As you said earlier, we've got the Elizabeth Smart documentary that's going to be on one of our channels, A&E in the U.S., and Lifetime is doing a movie. Similar thing, treatment of the Menendez case, which has got some new access in that one. So, but they're not all just crime stories. I think there is always the challenge of crossing over viewers of scripted to unscripted, because interestingly enough, even in crime, there are people who will only watch true crime and they don't watch crime drama, and vice versa, which I don't totally get, but there it is. There's more of a distance from scripted crime, I think, and you have to be willing to go there if you're going to watch true crime. So the answer is yes, especially for Lifetime, because it is a channel that has always had scripted series, movies, and unscripted. So it's a challenge to serve what are often differing audiences. But I think that's why it's about what are the attributes, sort of what are the kind of what we call viewer drivers or editorial attributes that these stories have, and those can be very similar across whether it's scripted, unscripted, or movies, let's say. So that's an organizing principle that we use when we're trying to develop.
And Sarah?
The scripted hybrid definitely works best for us, Ian, and we do have a couple of fully scripted projects coming up later at the end of the year. But it's by no means are we driven or feel that it's an area that we're going to go deeper into. It's people want real from us. So even if we do something scripted, it has to be absolutely an unadulterated real story that is driven by the facts. Absolutely driven by the facts. So, but I think the scripted hybrid has worked so well. Some shows more than others. Some of them have a huge amount of scripted content, but getting the balance right is exactly what we do.
Any other questions? Right here? There's a microphone coming your way.
Hi, Sarah. My name is Honori, and I'm from Broadcast Magazine. Hi. I was curious, actually, how the Discovery's acquisition of scripts might affect your programming mandate, and whether there would be any kind of changes coming up, any link-ups between brands, or...
Way too early to say. I mean, it's until the deal is in the works at the moment, and I can't really comment because there's nothing to say right now. Hopefully by early next year or a little later into 2018, we'll have a clear picture of it. But it's really exciting. We're very happy about it. But that's where we are right now.
One more question before. Well, then leave it to me. I have one thing to drop in your laps at the very end of our time. Something that I think is sort of fascinating, and is somebody brought up the idea of as we look into the future, you've got millennials now who are more gender fluid than they used to be, and this whole idea of actual female programming and this category, is it even useful? Is it something that you think is actually something worth pursuing and thinking of as a demographic? Laura?
Well, I think a lot of us on the network side have been talking in terms of psychographics and not necessarily specifically demographics, although, it's still, generally speaking, we're still divided as men and women in terms of one of the categorizations that we can be measured by. But I think the more, the way we're changing the way we're being measured with impressions and impressions across all platforms and how what advertisers are interested in, which is not just demographics, and it hasn't been for a long time. So I think when we're really trying to speak to an audience, we're trying to really figure out what those attributes are that they're interested in and what drives them, what drives their choices in terms of consumption of media and stories. And so that gender is one element of that, but is not the
be all end all.
The sort of male-female skew is like a very, very top line piece. We've all had to go a lot deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is most important, of course, for our ad sales people, you know, because this is how we make money, is by saying this is the audience that we're going to deliver. But as far as actually the appeal of the programming, you know, everybody and anybody is going to come to a good story. It doesn't matter, you know, about your sex or how you think about yourself. You want to be told a good story. And whatever platform you want to see it on, you know, is really important too. And that's where we'll be. Our content will be everywhere, on everything you see and everything you touch. And I sincerely hope that we continue to grow our audience with women and men alike.
Sarah Kozak, Laura Fleury, thank you very much. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you.